Remember those spooky stories we used to share as kids? Like huddled around a flashlight, whispering tales of haunted houses and things that go bump in the night.
Oh, absolutely. Especially in a hushed voice in the dark. Those always sent shivers down my spine.
Well, get ready for some chills because today we're taking a deep dive into real-life haunted house stories.
Ooh, fun.
But these aren't just any ghost stories. These are deeply personal accounts shared by listeners of the Morbid podcast.
So everyday people just like you and me.
Exactly. And it really makes you wonder, are these stories just our imaginations running wild? Or could there be something more to them?
I'm ready to find out.
So we're focusing on a specific episode of Morbid called Listener Tales, where they dove deep into haunted house stories. And let me tell you, these stories are intense.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
First up is Alan from England.
England, huh?
Yeah, and get this. He's been sensitive to the paranormal since he was a kid, even experimenting with homemade Ouija boards.
The Ouija board. A portal to the other side or just a harmless game?
Well, it seems like Alan's experiences lean towards the former. During one session, things went totally haywire. His mom had a collection of porcelain dolls.
Which, let's be honest, are already kind of creepy on their own.
Right. So during the session, one of the dolls started rotating its head.
Okay, now that's an image that'll stick with you. Sounds like the energy during that Ouija board session opened up something they couldn't control.
It didn't stop there. From then on, every time there was a thunderstorm, a baby's cries could be heard coming from his parents' room.
So, whatever they contacted, it seems like it latched onto the house even after the Ouija board was gone. A haunting echo.
Exactly. Now fast forward to Alan as an adult living in California. He moves into a house with some friends, and right away their toddler starts pointing at empty space and saying, "The lady."
Okay, kids and their imaginary friends, right. But something tells me this is more than just an active imagination.
You're right to be suspicious. One night, Alan overhears the toddler's mom yelling about putting him back in the closet. Apparently that was their form of discipline.
Oh, wow. That's disturbing on its own.
I know, right? And then he tells a friend about it.
Uh-oh.
And the friend's mom, who happens to be a medium, she had a dream about a boy trapped in a closet in that very same house.
Yeah, that's chillin'.
So the medium comes to the house, and as soon as she walks in, Alan walks through a freezing cold spot.
Okay, I'm already getting goosebumps.
And the medium says he just walked right through her.
So multiple people sensing this presence. So it's not just one person's imagination. And that cold spot, classic indicator of a spirit draining energy.
The medium starts communicating with the spirit, and it turns out to be the toddler's grandmother.
Oh, wow.
Furious that the boy is being abused.
And even in the afterlife. That's pretty powerful and heartbreaking to think about.
When the medium asked the grandmother to move on, the spirit got violent and threw her against the wall.
Whoa.
Then Alan was pushed to the ground by an unseen force.
The spirit is clearly powerful and agitated. It sounds like they were dealing with a very volatile situation.
After a lot of praying and, as Alan put it, puckering of bungholes, they finally convinced the grandmother to leave.
Okay, well, I'm glad they could get rid of her.
Thankfully, child services got involved, and the toddler and his mom moved out.
A bit of justice served, at least for the living. But it sounds like the house itself still held some unsettling energy.
Oh yeah, things were far from over. A heavy, oppressive feeling started to settle over the house. Alan would catch glimpses of something out of the corner of his eye, feel like he was being watched.
Classic signs of a haunting, building tension and unease.
And remember how I mentioned that the house was kind of a mess? Well, there was this half-eaten chicken wing by the front door that had been there so long, Alan named it Frank.
Oh, that's both hilarious and disturbing. And it paints a picture, doesn't it, of the overall neglect. And, it's like even food seemed to linger too long in that house.
Right. So with the house being dimly lit and messy, Alan had to use his phone as a flashlight to walk to his room at night.
I've been there.
And he always felt like something was walking right behind him, close enough to feel its breath on his neck.
Ugh, that sends shivers down my spine. That feeling of unseen invasion, of something violating your personal space.
One night, Alan stopped to check his phone. And whatever was behind him, it stopped too. Then it touched him. Its hand felt like a spider crawling up his neck and onto his cheek.
That's terrifying. It's one thing to sense a presence, but to be physically touched, that crosses a boundary, and escalates the fear to a whole new level.
Alan was understandably freaked out. He finally told one of his roommates, Dee, about it, and guess what? She'd been seeing smoky apparitions all over the house.
So multiple people experiencing different but equally disturbing phenomena, that really strengthens the case that something genuinely paranormal is happening in that house.
Right, and here's where it gets even more interesting. Alan and Dee had a bit of a connection, if you know what I mean.
Okay.
And they went to a witchcraft store for a reading.
Okay, that's a turn I did not see coming.
Mm.
From Ouija boards to witchcraft stores, Alan's definitely embracing the eclectic approach to the paranormal.
Well, according to the banshee at the store, Alan and Dee's combined energy was amplifying their sensitivity and attracting spirits.
That's fascinating. So emotions, particularly strong ones, can act as a sort of beacon, for paranormal activity.
They arranged for a team to do a ghost busting at the house after Thanksgiving. But the first night Alan came home from work, he was hit with this overwhelming wave of terror as soon as he touched the doorknob.
Smart move to trust his instincts. That primal fear is often a good indicator that something's not right.
He ended up staying at a friend's place. The next day, he went back for some clothes, and the whole house was shaking and banging. And when he was leaving, he saw what he describes as negative space in the shape of a man watching him from the window.
That's such a chilling image. It's like this entity was trying to intimidate him, make him aware of its power.
When the ghost-busting team arrived, they took one look at the house and ran off. Yeah, they came back later, saying it was so bad they needed extra time to prepare.
Wow, for a team of paranormal investigators to be that spooked, it must have been truly intense.
They finally did their thing, and it turns out there were 6 spirits in the house.
A full house of spirits, each with its own story and motivations, it seems.
The one following Alan had been a child killer who was executed.
Oh, geez.
And he attached himself to Alan because he sensed vulnerability.
That's both heartbreaking and terrifying. It reminds us that spirits were once people, capable of both good and evil. And for this spirit to prey on someone who had already experienced trauma is especially disturbing.
There was a mischievous spirit at the end of the hallway who made all the noise, but he was afraid to leave that spot because of the killer spirit.
Even in the afterlife, fear and power dynamics seem to persist.
And get this, outside Alan's bedroom was the ghost of his dad who had come back to protect him.
Oh, that's so touching. A father's love transcending even death to protect his child.
They also found spirits in his friend's daughter's room and 2 vortexes in the entry hall that were pulling in all kinds of entities.
So it wasn't just a haunted house, it was a paranormal hotspot. Multiple factors converging to create a truly chaotic situation.
They closed the vortexes, but the team said they wouldn't stay closed unless Alan or Dee moved out. So Alan got out of there as fast as he could.
A wise decision. Sometimes the only way to escape a haunting is to simply leave, Leave the location.
Let's move on to Natalie's story. It all started in first grade when she had a bathroom accident in class.
Oh no, that's every kid's worst nightmare. It's amazing how those seemingly small childhood events can stay with us.
Her mom picked her up and took her to visit her uncle, who was renovating a house. Years later, she found out that house was seriously haunted, particularly the 3rd floor.
Okay, so we've got another haunted house entering the mix. I'm sensing a pattern here.
Her uncle had all sorts of encounters with a shadowy entity with red eyes.
Red eyes are often associated with demonic entities, In folklore, it's a visual cue that signals danger and malevolence.
Natalie did some research and found connections to a Belgian folktale about a creature called the Necker.
The Necker.
Yeah, a shape-shifting demon with red eyes that eats children.
That's creepy. It adds a layer of historical context and ties into our primal fear of something that preys on the vulnerable.
After that visit, things started happening in Natalie's own house. Her sister's hair would be pulled, Natalie would push down the stairs, and she started having sleep paralysis, where she'd see the red-eyed entity watching her.
So whatever was in that house, it seems like it followed them home. And sleep paralysis is already terrifying, but to have that coupled with the demonic figure, that's a whole other level of horror.
Natalie's dad finally confronted the entity, and it left. Just like that.
Wow, what a protective father. It seems like sometimes a strong will and a refusal to be intimidated can actually drive a spirit away.
Now let's hear about Mary Grace's experience. Her family moved from a violent neighborhood in Charlotte, North Carolina, to a beautiful Victorian home in South Carolina.
It's amazing how a house can represent both safety and danger. They were escaping a real-life threat only to walk into a paranormal one.
They thought they'd found the perfect place to heal, but it turned out to be notoriously haunted. Weird things started happening almost immediately. Candlesticks would be moved or thrown, chairs would slide across the room, glasses would fall and shatter.
It's like the spirits were making their presence known, almost playfully at first, testing the waters, seeing how the family would react.
Then Mary Grace's gerbil and turtle both died on the same day.
That's so sad. And it raises the question, can spirits harm animals? Or was it just a tragic coincidence?
One night, she woke up to a hand pressing her face into her pillow. Later, her mom told her she had sleepwalked and said there was a man in her room.
Sleepwalking is often associated with paranormal activity, isn't it? It's like the spirit is trying to influence or control the person's actions.
And at the same time, their dog, who hated her dad, came flying downstairs and cowered in his lap, terrified.
Animals are often more sensitive to the paranormal than humans, right? It's like they can sense things we can't.
Mary Grace started having trouble sleeping. She'd feel like someone was running towards her every time she closed her eyes.
That feeling of being stalked even in your own home, it's a deeply unsettling experience.
One night, she saw a woman in a red dress standing outside her window.
Uh-oh.
The woman looked up at her, and Mary Grace quickly ducked down.
That direct eye contact is chilling. It's like the spirit is acknowledging her presence, making a connection.
A year later, she was participating in a Halloween cemetery tour and learned about a woman named Marie Wallace, who became known as the Woman in Red. Marie would wear her red dress and go into town every day, waiting for her father to return from the Civil War. He never did.
Oh, wow. What a tragic story. And to think Mary Grace had unknowingly witnessed a fragment of that woman's unending grief.
As she got older, the activity continued. Her wardrobe doors would be found open even though she always locked them, and she'd hear a little girl's laughter and the sound of a bouncing ball.
That's both sad and creepy. You know, the laughter suggests a child's spirit, but the fact that it's happening in a house with such a dark history adds a layer of unease.
They believe the little girl was Marie Scott, a 5-year-old who had burned to death in the house. There were also accounts of a woman who died in Mary Grace's bedroom after being hit by a car.
So many layers of tragedy and loss embedded in the house. It's like the walls themselves are holding on to the energy of these events.
They eventually had to move, and as they were packing, things got crazy. Mary Grace was pushed down the stairs and fractured her wrist. Her sister was being woken up by women cackling on the porch. Furniture was being moved, and heavy things suddenly became impossible to lift.
It's like the spirits were becoming more agitated, almost angry that the family was leaving.
On moving day, Mary Grace found a stack of moving boxes in her empty room. It's just bizarre, like the spirits were trying to help. Or maybe just mess with them one last time.
Right. You never know with these things.
While her mom was waxing the floors, all the hair on her head stood up. Then the front door slammed open and shut. The bells started ringing, and a snake was seen sliding down the banister.
What a dramatic exit. It's like the house itself was putting on a final, terrifying show.
Speaking of dramatic exits, this last story you sent me is truly one for the books. It involved a family home, lots of dead flies, a mysterious cut, and a whole lot of unanswered questions.
Ooh, sounds intense. I'm always fascinated by those cases where the haunting seems to target a specific location or object. You know, it's like the energy is concentrated, making it that much more potent.
This story comes from a listener named Desiree, and it starts with what seems like a dream come true. She and her husband, Drew, bought his grandparents' house, the very place where his father and siblings grew up. You can imagine all the warm memories tied to a place like that, right?
Absolutely. The family home, full of history and love. It's like a tangible connection to the past.
Well, that's what they thought, too. Until, you guessed it, things took a seriously creepy turn. Right after they signed the papers, one of Drew's aunts casually asked Desiree if she was sure she wanted to move into a haunted house.
Wait, what? They dropped that bombshell after the sale? Talk about a family secret you wish you hadn't uncovered.
Right. As it turns out, almost all of Drew's siblings had experienced something creepy in the house growing up. But they never mentioned it until after the sale.
Oh no, that's like showing up to a potluck and finding out everyone brought the same dish. But in this case, the dish is paranormal activity.
Desiree and Drew decided to ignore all the classic horror movie red flags
Bold move.
and completely renovated the house.
Oh, wow.
Drew, however, worked at a state, so Desiree was often alone in the house during this process.
Okay, I'm already getting nervous for her. Being alone in a house that your entire husband's family says is haunted during renovations, no less. Talk about a recipe for sleepless nights.
You would think with all those stories, they would at least proceed with caution. But as Desiree began renovating, the strange events began too. It started small, just footsteps and flickering lights.
Classic signs, you know? It's like the spirits are testing the waters, seeing how far they can push things before they're noticed.
Then one night, she heard something big being moved around upstairs.
Uh,
The next day, she found a tote in the hallway that she knew she hadn't left there. And that night, things got even louder. So Desiree decided to investigate.
I can't even imagine. It takes a lot of courage to face those fears head on, you know?
She went upstairs, and all the boxes and totes that had been neatly stacked had been moved. And there were thousands of dead flies on the floor.
Thousands. Oh, that's just wrong. Dead flies are unsettling enough on their own, but that many. It's like the room itself was rejecting the changes, that she was trying to make.
Desiree cleaned them up, called exterminators. Nothing worked. The flies kept reappearing, always in that one room. Things got so bad that she started locking herself in her bedroom at night, too afraid to come out until morning.
That's heartbreaking. To feel so unsafe in your own home, it's like the haunting is taking away her sense of peace and security.
And you would think it couldn't get worse, right?
Oh, no.
But one night, when Drew was home and his cousin was visiting, they all heard the most inhuman growl coming from the top of the stairs. They searched the house, but found nothing.
A growl. Ugh, that's primal, aggressive. It's like whatever was there was letting them know it was in charge.
A few weeks later, a friend of Desiree's, Haley, was staying with her, and they were both in Desiree's bedroom when Haley woke her up terrified. She swore she'd heard a woman whistling, and it was getting louder, closer.
That's so eerie. A whistling ghost. It's such a human sound, but to hear it without a source, especially coming closer, that would send shivers down my spine.
The whistling began to move toward the stairs. Desiree and Haley ran outside and waited there till morning. They even had the house blessed, but nothing worked. Desiree was starting to experience night terrors, felt sick constantly, and was spiraling into depression.
This really highlights the psychological impact of these hauntings, doesn't it? That constant fear and anxiety can be so debilitating.
Absolutely. And it all came to a head one night when Desiree and Haley were sitting on the bed talking. The bathroom door downstairs slammed shut, then Desiree's bedroom door began slamming over and over again. They couldn't get it open.
It's like the house itself was turning against them.
Finally, it stopped. They got out, and Desiree collapsed in the yard. A few weeks later, Haley came over to help Desiree clear out the room with all the dead flies, including this old heavy dresser that was built into the wall.
I bet that dresser had some serious energy.
You're right. The second Haley touched it, she gasped and said she had a vision of a woman in old-fashioned clothing hiding from a man with a knife.
Wow, that's intense. It's like the dresser itself was a portal to the past, holding on to the energy of that terrifying event, and it connects to the whistling they were hearing, doesn't it? The spirit of that woman was trying to communicate with them.
That night, Desiree found a dinner knife stabbed into her back door.
Whoa. That's a huge escalation. It's like the spirit was no longer content with just making noises and moving things around, This felt like a threat.
The very next morning, Desiree went upstairs and felt something like a cobweb on her cheek. When she wiped it away, there was blood on her hand. She looked in the mirror and had a deep gash on her face.
Oh my gosh. This is where it crosses a line for me. It's one thing to experience unsettling events, but a physical attack like that, it's terrifying.
Desiree sent me a photo of the cut, and it's truly chilling.
Yeah.
They sold the house and moved out as quickly as they could.
Sometimes you have to know when to walk away, Some places just hold on to too much darkness.
So, what do you make of all this? 4 very different people, 4 very different houses, but all experiencing unsettling, sometimes terrifying paranormal activity. Does it make you think twice about the idea of haunted houses?
It does. It's easy to dismiss these things as, folklore or imagination. But when you hear firsthand accounts from people who've experienced these things, it makes you wonder if there's more to the world than we can see or explain.
I'm with you on that. It really makes you question everything, doesn't it? If these seemingly ordinary people had such intense experiences, what does that mean for the rest of us?
That's the question, isn't it? Maybe there's more to reality than meets the eye. Maybe there are forces at play that we don't fully understand.
It's definitely something to think about. And maybe next time you hear a bump in the night, you'll pause and wonder, is it just the house settling? Or something more?
Or maybe you'll just leave a nightlight on, just in case.
Good advice. And if you're interested in exploring more fascinating topics like this, make sure you subscribe to The Deep Dive. We've got tons of incredible stories and insights waiting for you. Until next time, stay curious.